Whoa, this is getting rife, isn't it? It's CrossFit over. Woke up to this on Monday morning, I think it was, CrossFit Mayhem Nation email. CrossFit is over. I was like, damn, what they done now?
Well, of course, this would bring me back. So in his recent video, Craig Ritchie addresses this email from Mayhem about CrossFit being over. And we'll get to that in a moment. But of course, the idea of CrossFit being over or CrossFit dying, well, it's not exactly a new thought. In fact, if you just search CrossFit Dying on YouTube, a number of videos will come up from the last couple of months and even further back of people addressing this topic of is CrossFit dying or going away or being over. Now, in Craig's video, this time he's going specifically into why Mayhem have made that statement, and they talk about Google search analytics and things like that, and he does some of his own research as well. It's a good video. I'd recommend you go and watch it if you want to know exactly what Mayhem meant in their email. And before anyone thinks that this is a video of me bashing Craig Ritchie or claiming that he is saying CrossFit is over or CrossFit is dying, this is what he has to say about CrossFit.
I don't think CrossFit's dying. I think there's a core audience of an amazing community of an amazing athletes and people, and it's a cool, kick-ass, freaking thing. It just needs a little something different, just to kind of everyone's eyes just to go again, you know?
But here's the thing. What do we mean when we say CrossFit is dying? Or what do people even mean when they say CrossFit? Now, it might sound like a stupid question, but after watching Craig's video, I left the house, I walked down the road to my local affiliate, CrossFit Bath, for the workout of the day. So CrossFit Bath is a 15-year affiliate. It's a Monday morning in October and it was buzzing. It was full of people. There were coaches that were taking the class as well as obviously coaches leading the class. There were members that have been there for many, many years. There was even someone that was doing their first class off of the intro course. So it was very hard for me to look around, see all of that and think, oh yeah, CrossFit is dying. But in Craig Ritchie's video, he makes some comparisons with other sports.
And then just for my kind of like, I don't know, how my brain works, I was like, maybe just let's compare it to UFC, another kind of fringe sport. UFC was kind of coming up at the same time as CrossFit was coming up. And they actually had the same amount of popularity and interest during January 2014. But since then, as you can see, CrossFit has just slowly curved off and the UFC has managed to stonks. And then I did this as well. I put the F1 on there. F1 actually had a lot more popularity than UFC and CrossFit throughout the whole time, but you can see there was kind of like a steady drop off. But then Formula One Drive to Survive hit and look at that peak at the end. Media, the big driver. Same thing with UFC. Media has been incredible, promotions, athletes.
So in his video, he references UFC and F1 as some comparisons. And with F1, we see that, well, it was always pretty popular. It had a dip, but then it had some growth after the documentary. But here's the thing, no matter how big the growth is of people watching F1, few are then jumping in the car and giving it a go themselves. And here we run into the common issue we have of when we're talking about CrossFit, the methodology, or CrossFit, the sport. Because people still love to do CrossFit. Even if they're not always calling it CrossFit, we know that that's what they're doing. And another interesting thing that Craig mentions in his video is this idea of perhaps having some standardized competitions throughout the year.
And thinking off the top of my head, if you break that down and you have specialist events, you just have like this is off the top of my head because I'm like passionate about it, but imagine having a CrossFit Throwdown, okay? So it's like, it sets up in a town or a city on a one-day event, and in the morning, it's a barbell event, Grace. An hour and a half break, then there's a gymnastics test, and then an hour and a half break, and then there's a conditioning test, and then an hour and a half break, and then there's like a CrossFit Metcon. But they stay the same, so you can have world records in each, know what you're turning up and doing. I know that's against kind of the CrossFit principles, but I mean the multitude of things that you'll hit. And then people can get really competitive about it. They can train about it. It's kind of like high rocks at the moment. People know what they're getting themselves in for when they go to a competition and they can see themselves on the scoreboard against other people and compete on the day in what they know they're going to do.
So of course, when we talk of standardized competitions you can train for, we have the example of something like high rocks. Now I know many members at CrossFit Bath, for example, have done high rocks, maybe more than once. And when they trained to try and get a better score on going back, where did they train? Well, of course, it was at CrossFit Bath. So as we see things like high rocks grow, could it be that more people that want to train to get better at high rocks, well, they will stumble across a CrossFit box? Another example I always like to throw out is something like grid. So you've got the Florida Grid League. Now we've got one European grid sort of starting up as well. But if you follow any of the members on these teams, you'll often see that they are fully involved with their local affiliate. That is where they go to train to get better at their sport. And this weekend gone, we had AFEX South. Now, if you haven't heard about AFEX, it's a competition that has a standardized format that is taking place in different locations, but it's always going to look the same no matter where you go. It has a warm-up zone followed by a strength zone, then you've got a recovery, a conditioning zone, recovery again, and finally a Metcon. And of course, people are going to be training in CrossFit boxes or training CrossFit in order to get better at doing these AFEX competitions. And you can bet that there were a number of members from CrossFit Bath that were down there at AFEX South giving it a go. And again, you see the community and CrossFit thriving in these competitions. So as I said, for me, it's hard to look at my local affiliate or what's going on locally around me and think that CrossFit is dying. But what about CrossFit, the sport? What about the games, the high-profile athletes? Well, we cannot deny that it's been pretty turbulent times for CrossFit over the last couple of years. There's been a number of changes and they haven't always been for the better. And again, in Craig's video, he touches on the media around CrossFit and maybe changes that could happen there. And I think when we look at the media surrounding CrossFit in general and the CrossFit Games, we can all see things that we wish they'd do more of or less of, or ways we'd like to see it improved. And of course, there are things maybe we'd like to see CrossFit doing in the off-season that would attract more eyes to the sport of CrossFit. We think of things like the Invitational, but maybe there are other types of exhibitions that they could put on that would attract people that we'd like to see. I thought of one idea, something I'd really like to see. That is the topic of a future video though, but if there's things you think would be interesting to see through the year that you'd like CrossFit to put on as sort of exhibitions, let me know in the comments. And what about the CrossFit Games themselves? Well, if you've been paying attention to what Dave Castro has been saying since this year's Games, you would know that the CrossFit Games is changing in one very specific way and for a very deliberate reason. And that isn't just to save money. And if you want to know exactly what that is, well, that is my next video. So make sure you subscribe and come back and I'll be talking about that change. But ultimately, CrossFit, it's a unique beast. It's very hard to compare it to other sports. Yes, it has its ups and downs, and maybe we're in a period of downs at the moment, but it also has a community that knows how to rally, that is incredibly passionate. So I wouldn't start planning its funeral just yet.